Happened back in 1991. 4 teenage girls were found shot and killed. For years, the question swirled about who was responsible for this horrible crime until now.
Apparently, a robbery homicide is 3 fatalities.
Last 10-4, one route.
Tonight, you'll hear 4 names: Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy. They were best friends, sisters, daughters, teenagers with futures ahead of them until that December night inside a yogurt shop in Austin, Texas.
On December 6, 1991, there was a robbery, fire, and murder committed.
We'll trace the initial confusion, the confessions that fell apart,
I remember one girl screaming, terrified.
and the DNA discovery that redirected the case. Their families fought for answers through botched trials and overturned verdicts, only to watch hope rise and collapse again. And just when the investigation seemed frozen in place, science revealed something no one expected.
The only physical evidence located at that scene has been matched to him.
It all began with the scene firefighters uncovered that night. December 6th, 1991, became the night Austin changed forever. What began as a routine call to a fire at the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop on West Anderson Lane turned into something far worse than anyone anticipated. Inside the scorched walls, after the flames were brought down, 4 teenage girls were found in a scene that revealed the fire was not the true beginning of the tragedy. That night, the city was alive with holiday energy. Shopping centers bustled, and families were out late. By closing time, the yogurt shop should have been quiet. Instead, around midnight, smoke and fire drew a crowd of onlookers who stood outside, unaware of the violence hidden inside the building. Fire crews worked quickly, but even as the blaze was being contained, investigators recognized suspicious burn patterns. Accelerant had been poured across the floor, clear signs this was arson meant to hide something far more terrible. The grim certainty came when the victims were identified. Jennifer Harbison, 17, her sister Sarah, 15, their friend Eliza Thomas, 17, and Amy Ayers, 13. They were found bound, gagged, and fatally shot before the fire was set. The brutality shattered the assumption that Austin was a safe place where violence mostly stayed distant. A city that left doors unlocked suddenly felt vulnerable. Ordinary kids working a weekend shift had been targeted, and the crime cut directly into the community's sense of trust. For investigators, the crime scene became an immediate obstacle. The water and foam used to extinguish the fire mixed with blood, ash, and possible fibers. Heat burned away fingerprints and warped any remnants of weapons. Firefighting had saved nearby businesses from destruction, but inside the yogurt shop, the evidence lay damaged and fragile. What remained offered only fragments, leaving detectives to work with a puzzle where many of the pieces had been destroyed. In the days that followed, tips flooded into police lines. Thousands of calls suggested potential suspects or theories. Detectives followed each lead, often working late into the night. What they collected filled case files and stacked boxes, yet no clear path to a suspect emerged. Every clue seemed either incomplete or contaminated. The investigation became a race against time, with each false lead eroding public confidence. This uncertainty weighed heavily over the case. Each item of evidence carried the question of whether it was genuinely tied to the killers or simply debris left from the ruined building. From the very start, the trail did not just go cold, it started broken. Investigators needed something definitive to move forward. But in those first crucial months, the case remained mired in confusion. And when answers finally came years later, they weren't born from the wreckage of physical evidence, but from words spoken in interrogation rooms. In 1999, 8 years after the murders, police made arrests they believed would finally break the case. 4 men were taken into custody, but attention quickly narrowed to 2, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott. Both had been teenagers when the crime occurred, and under lengthy interrogations, each eventually confessed. On the surface, it looked like the answer Austin had been waiting for. Their words carried weight because they included details that seemed to match the crime scene. To many, it sounded as though only the killers could have known those things. But closer scrutiny revealed troubling problems. Their accounts contradicted each other and contained inconsistent details: how the girls were attacked, how the fire started, even the order of events. Those differences only became more concerning as questions grew about the conditions under which the confessions were obtained. The interrogation stretched late into the night, filled with repeated insistence that cooperation could mean leniency. Both men later said they confessed out of pressure, fear, and exhaustion, not guilt. Defense attorneys argued that what appeared to be insider knowledge could have been the result of suggestion, leading rather than recalling. These doubts weren't on the margins. They became the center of the case and cast shadows across every piece of testimony. For families, the brief relief of arrests quickly gave way to renewed uncertainty. Courtrooms filled with reporters and onlookers who hoped they were watching long-delayed justice, yet each contradiction weakened that hope. The thought that the convictions might not rest on truth was deeply painful. Closure slipped further out of reach. Despite the problems, both Springsteen and Scott were convicted. Springsteen at first sentenced to death, later reduced to life, and Scott given life in prison. Their convictions, however, did not last. In 2009, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned them, ruling that constitutional violations in the use of confession evidence made the verdicts unstable. Adding to the blow, the cases against the other arrested men were dismissed that same year after DNA testing pointed to an unknown male instead of any of the defendants. The unraveling of those prosecutions left the city frustrated and unsettled. Austin had spent nearly 2 decades looking for accountability, only to have its strongest leads collapse under the weight of constitutional violations and unreliable words. Detectives were forced to confront a hard truth. Confessions alone would never be enough to solve this crime. The families and the community were left waiting once more, this time for something stronger than testimony, something that could not be bent or taken back. And eventually, that something arrived. It came not from suspects in a room, but from the forensic evidence that had quietly endured since 1991. Decades later, science introduced a kind of evidence this case had not yet seen. Proof that didn't hang on words spoken under pressure, but on biology. Advanced testing in 2006 produced a single male DNA profile from assault swabs taken from the victims. For investigators, it was the first solid lead that didn't depend on memory or interrogation tactics. What made the discovery more significant was who the profile excluded. The DNA did not belong to Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, or any of the other young men once accused. That finding undermined the earlier convictions and forced investigators to widen their search. It pointed, unmistakably, to the presence of another man in the yogurt shop, someone outside the frame the police had pursued for nearly a decade. By this point, forensic science had advanced well beyond the 1990s. Growing databases and new laboratory methods allowed investigators to think beyond Austin's borders. The male DNA profile was entered into national systems, and soon comparisons began to connect it to an individual already known to law enforcement in other parts of the South. That individual was Robert Eugene Brashers. Investigators later found links in other states between Brashers and violent crimes ranging from sexual assaults to murders. His history included offenses in South Carolina, Tennessee, and Missouri, as well as an attempted murder conviction in Florida years earlier. The brutality of these crimes showed a pattern that made Brashers a serious suspect in Austin's unsolved case. But the investigation met an immovable obstacle. Brashers had died by suicide in 1999 during a police standoff in Missouri, long before the Austin DNA was fully examined. His death meant there would never be a confession, never an interrogation, and never a trial that could confirm or deny his involvement directly. Even so, investigators continued to pursue his profile. In 2018, authorities exhumed Brasher's remains to gather additional DNA. They also sought samples from his relatives to strengthen the comparisons. Each test added weight to the suspicion that Brasher's had crossed paths with Austin in December 1991, though the case stopped short of a definitive conclusion. Part of the delay also came from limits in technology itself. Investigators faced the slow and costly process of using genetic genealogy, which relies on public databases where individuals must opt in for their information to be available. Law enforcement agencies like Austin's commonly try state labs first, before turning to private companies because of the expenses. Another factor that added years to the search for answers. For the victims' families, the DNA breakthrough carried both relief and frustration. It cleared names that had been wrongfully tied to the case, proving the earlier convictions never should have stood. Yet the strongest suspect died before he could ever face justice, leaving another gap between evidence and accountability. The paradox remains. Science revealed more truth than ever before, but it did not resolve the case. The yogurt shop murders still sit open, haunting Austin with both the progress of what we know and the weight of what we may never confirm. And that contradiction raises the larger question. What happens when justice depends on evidence that vanishes before it can ever be fully heard? Early firefighting and damaged evidence made this case fragile. Years later, confessions collapsed under scrutiny. And when DNA finally produced a different lead, the man investigators named was already gone. That sequence left Austin with no courtroom closure, even as science reshaped what was known. Investigators continue to use genetic genealogy and advanced testing as the best path forward, but those tools have limits: technical, legal, and practical. The final chapter remains unwritten, yet DNA changed the questions investigators are asking. What do you think? Can science deliver closure when a suspect is already dead? Tell us below and subscribe if you'd like to hear future mysteries